Welcome to... Shut up, E.T. Welcome to 20-minute documentaries where... What the hell you dropped? Damn. I tell him to shut up more often. Welcome to 20-minute documentaries. Welcome to 20-minute documentaries where we bring you 20-minute or less documentaries on interesting topics like today's topic, Carmine Persico, the snake. I'm from New Jersey. I love Mafia stories. And this is a great one. So let's get into it. Subscribe, like, all that good shit that they say. Stop waving money in my face, man. All right, let's get into it. We're going to talk about a mafia figure from the Colombo family. Not Lil Carmine from The Sopranos. One of my favorite characters, hilarious on The Sopranos. But Carmine the Snake Persico. Carmine the Snake Persico. He was one of the last long-reigning bosses of the American Mafia. It's a man whose influence stretched from Brooklyn streets all the way to the federal courthouse, and eventually in a prison cell where he would unfortunately die. So this is the story about how one young Italian kid with a big heart and a little street sense rose through the ranks of the Colombo crime family and the decades-long battle with law enforcement that ultimately ended his reign. Carmine John Persico Jr. was born on August 8, 1933 in Brooklyn, New York. His family wasn't wealthy. His father was a law clerk and his mother was a homemaker. But Persico grew up surrounded by the undercurrents of street gangs and especially the emerging post-war Italian mafia. Their presence throughout the boroughs was undeniable and strong. By his early teens, Persico was already known on the streets in South Brooklyn. He was a charismatic young man, but he was fearless and volatile. And he gravitated toward the gangs and the streets where fights and theft and street-level crime was a way of rising through the ranks and proving yourself. But at 17 years old, Persico's name was going to hit the newspapers and the headlines for the very first time in his young criminal career. He was arrested in connection with a brutal gang brawl in Prospect Park that left one man tragically dead. Although charges were eventually dropped, the incident cemented his reputation. It also caught the attention of some very important and very influential figures in the criminal underworld in New York City in the early 1950s. And these early encounters would pave the way for a young Carmine Persico to become even more powerful and even more dangerous. In the early 1950s, Persico would become an associate of the organization that would eventually become known as the Colombo crime family, which was then led and controlled by acting boss Joseph Profaci. Persico wasn't a typical recruit. He rose through the ranks very quickly due to his boldness and his propensity to accept jobs that required violence and fearlessness. He soon then earned a reputation as someone who would carry out orders with no hesitation. One federal agent later described him as cunning as he was ruthless, a remark that echoed through decades of investigations and would cement Persico's legacy and reputation on the streets. By his mid-20s, Persico had already risen up through the Colombo crime family ranks and was already commanding small crews and running extortion, loan sharking, and hijacking operations. But his rise would accelerate even more dramatically during one of the family's darkest periods, known as the Profaci Wars. In the early 1960s, internal tension would erupt inside of the Profaci-led Colombo crime family. A faction of young members, led by the Gallo brothers, rebelled against what they saw as excessive demands and unfair and unreasonable treatment by acting boss Joseph Profaci. This conflict became known as the Profaci Wars, and Carmine Persico played a very pivotal role. In 1960, when tensions between boss Joseph Profaci and the rebellious Gallo brothers erupted into open conflict, Carmine Persico was already building a reputation as a fearless street enforcer. He was close to the Gallos and especially Crazy Joe Gallo. He worked alongside the crew on hijacking, shakedowns, enforcement operations, other jobs. And when the Profaci War began, Carmine Persico initially sided with the Gallo brothers. He joined them in their challenge against Profaci's oppressive tribute demands, but that loyalty would not last. In late 1960, the Gallows dramatically escalated the conflict by kidnapping Profaci's top men. And that included acting underboss Joe Magliocco and Profaci's own brother, Frank. While the Gallows believed that this would force Profaci to negotiate, Persico saw something a bit different, an opportunity. During the tense standoff, Persico began secretly communicating with the Profaci loyalists, whether out of ambition, fear, distrust, insecurity for the Gallows' position and their volatile leadership. Persico would go on to flip sides. This decision would shape the entire war. Carmine's covert betrayal would go on to earn him the infamous nickname, the Snake, which would follow him for decades. By 1961, Persico had become a trusted weapon for the Profaci side. One of the most defining events of the war came in August of 1961, when Profaci gunmen attempted to kill Larry Gallo, Crazy Joe's brother, in a Brooklyn bar. According to law enforcement reports and later accounts, Carmine Persico personally participated in the hit, ambushing and trying to strangle him with garrote? What's a garrote? The attempt nearly succeeded, but luckily for Larry Gallo, a New York City police officer had wandered into the bar and was able to thwart the attack, saving his life. And this boss assassination attempt cemented Persico's break from the Gallo brothers and helped escalate the war into full-scale street violence and murder. After the failed strangulation of Larry Gallo, the Profaci War exploded. Gunfights, drive-by shootings, ambushes had spread through all corners of Brooklyn, and Persico had emerged as one of Profaci's most trusted and aggressive soldiers. He targeted Gallo loyalists, he coordinated retaliation efforts, and he proved himself to be one of the most valuable parts of Profaci's leadership team. He also survived several attempted hits on his life by the Gallo crew, which only added to his legend. Persico's combination of cunning, violence, and strategic betrayal helped to stabilize the Profaci faction during the darkest days of the conflict, and it earned him rapid promotion. In June of 1962, Joseph Profaci ultimately died, and his longtime underboss, Joe Magliocco, took control of the family. Persico's loyalty during the war had paid off. Magliocco relied heavily on Carmine Persico to maintain order and to suppress any lingering Gallo influence. While the conflict continued in smaller bursts, Persico had now positioned himself to be one of the most powerful young figures in the reorganized Colombo crime family, a man who had proven his capabilities under fire and under pressure. The Mafia Commission failed to recognize Magliocco as the acting boss of the Colombo faction. And as a result, in 1963, Magliocco was exposed for trying to murder several members of the Mafia Commission with then-acting Bonanno crime family boss Joseph Bonanno. As a response, the Mafia Commission forced Magliocco into retirement in 1963. The Profaci War had ended with the jailing of the Gallows and tensions had subsided. But the real winner was not Profaci. The real winner was not Magliocco. The real winner of the war was not the Gallows. It was Carmine Persico. He had emerged from the war with elevated status, deep connections, and a reputation as both a survivor and a tactician. The influence that Persico gained during the Profaci War paved the way for his eventual rise to boss of the Colombo family, a position he would control directly or indirectly for decades. Essentially, Carmine Persico didn't just participate in the Profaci War, he shaped the entire outcome. He navigated alliances and betrayals with his deadly precision and playing of both sides. His actions during those years laid the foundation for one of the longest and most controversial mafia reigns in American history. After Profaci's death and Magliocco's retirement, there would be several changes within the Colombo family. Persico would go on to become a trusted captain in the reorganized group. By the early 1970s, after years of internal struggle, Persico unofficially took control of the organization. Even while facing indictments and serving short prison stints, he continued to manage operations from behind the scenes and behind bars, a skill that would define much of his criminal career. Finally, in the mid-70s, Persico was widely recognized as the boss of the Colombo crime families. Under Persico's leadership, the family engaged in racketeering, extortion, and union corruption, and would infiltrate countless legitimate businesses. But unfortunately, Persico's growing power would put a target on his back, not from just rival families, but from the FBI and law enforcement. By the early 1980s, federal authorities had launched one of the most ambitious law enforcement investigations in U.S. history, the Mafia Commission investigation. The FBI had uncovered evidence that bosses of New York's 5 families, including Carmine Persico, were coordinating criminal activity nationwide at the highest levels through what was known as the Commission. Persico was indicted along with leaders of the Genovese and Lucchese families. While awaiting trial, he famously chose to represent himself in court, an extraordinarily risky move in a case with stakes so high. This decision would ultimately prove to backfire on Persico. The federal government had overwhelming evidence. In 1986, Carmine Persico was convicted of racketeering, murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and other charges in a landmark commission trial. He received a staggering 100-year federal prison sentence, ensuring he would never see the light of day again as a free man. But even from behind bars, Persico would refuse to relinquish his power and authority. Most mafia bosses lose their influence and power once incarcerated, but Persico would become the exception. His influence would only grow. From inside federal penitentiaries, including the infamous Lompoc facility in California, Persico continued to operate and control the Colombo family, appointing acting bosses and passing messages through staff, lawyers, relatives, and loyal, trusted associates. Persico's remote leadership created great instability within the family and ultimately contributed to the Colombo family's civil war of the early 1990s, where factions loyal to Persico clashed violently with rival factions from within the same organization. The result was years of bloodshed, dozens of attempted hits, and severe damage to the family's power within the commission. Persico's grip on leadership was strong, but it came at a price. Carmine Persico would go on to spend more than 3 decades in federal custody. He remained adamant that he was wrongfully convicted, even when the federal government continued to accuse him of orchestrating crime from inside his cell. In failing health, Persico was transferred to a medical facility within the federal prison system, and on March 7, 2019, Persico would die at the age of 85, still serving the 100-year sentence from the commission trial. His death marked the end of one of the longest and most controversial leaderships in American organized crime history. Carmine the Snake Persico's life was a study in ambition, brutality, and consequence. Persico rose from the lowest level of Brooklyn street gangs in the early 20th century to become one of the highest-ranking mafia figures of the entire criminal underworld, but he ultimately spent more than half of his life in prison. His story is a reminder that power built on violence and corruption rarely lasts, and almost always ends the same way. Thanks for watching the video. If you made it this far, hit the like button, drop a comment. Make sure you subscribe. We're a new channel. Let us know in the comments what you want to see next. Until next time.